Hi, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. Just to make everybody feel pretty good, the weather in Ottawa and Montreal is pretty interesting. It's called winter. And I think it was going down tonight till what, minus 24, Marlene?
Minus 30 with the wind.
Minus 30 with the wind. So we're hoping for less wind, and we're hoping for not a sudden increase in temperature, but a little farther up from where it is. I have a number of questions, thanks to everybody who's sending them in. It's kind of a little bit of a lineup, but not much. Over the next little while, we'll probably cover them all. Keep sending them in, because sometimes what happens is there are, let's say, 3 or 4 questions that are very similar with respect to others that have sent others in. So they sometimes can be covered fairly quickly. So this question is from Ann Jones in, I would say Kitchener. Cambridge. And it says, how is love related to emotion? This really interesting question in a kind of a way. And the second part was, how is frequency related to various emotions? And she goes on to say that some schools of thought believe that certain emotions are a source of disease in humans. And due to some emotions having a lower frequency than others, that kind of thing. There's all kinds of books written, as you probably realize, about loving. If you actually engage with the experience of loving on a deeper level, and I'm assuming, that you're really talking about this, and I may be wrong. I'll just put these things down here. So if you look at a very deep level of loving, first of all, you have to realize that the personality itself is engaged deeply with the physical body. That's its primary relevance in these planes. And then you look at the personality, and however it's been cultivated and developed in you, in me, in anybody, is directly related to how you were brought up, how you experienced the love of your parents, how you experienced the love of your dogs, cats, and whatever, and how you engage with the kind of friends that you have. Typically, that engagement will be related to being comfortable with these folks, and there is an act of love in this one. But when you're dealing with a relationship with a deeper level of loving, how it feels physically is if you're in a kind of enclosure. And I'm not saying that love is very enclosing. No, not like that. It's as if there's a space around you. Your relationship with you is that you are watching what's happening in you, and your emotions are actually quiet, and your mind is fairly quiet, because at that state, a deep level of emotion is encompassing all of what you might call you, your personality, its particular versions of how it needs to see the world to be comforted within itself. This is neither good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just how it works for us. But if you're looking at an engagement with liking or loving, you're actually looking in a strange way, pretty deep, but you're interpreting. When you're around other people, you interpret how that should be. And the interpretation is what we often call loving. It's very strange. It's the energy coming out of another that may be similar or not similar to you. You may have someone actually very much, very, very similar to you, engaging energetically out of the solar plexus, root gonad center. And their energy is moving up into the upper places within them, but their focus is on the lower interaction that they have with life, because their focus is on how they are functioning here in this personality world. And that is legitimate. If you have an alignment with them energetically, this is relative to frequency of your second part of the question, then you will feel perhaps comfortable with them. You may even feel as if they may not be exciting enough for you or engaging enough for you. They don't have that X quality, whatever that is, that relates to the personality, feeling comfortable with another person. There's a rendering of loving that occurs in every individual in the world that is focused naturally, not negatively, but naturally, on personality traits, personality biases, how a person appears and engages with you, takes a measure of you, and then engages with you. For example, I'll give you an example of that. Let's say you engage with a person and they're comfortable inside and they've been involved with a higher state somehow. And in this particular versioning, I'm wondering, we're getting a phone call. It could be somebody's having trouble, but it's not. No, sorry. With a versioning that relates to how they think the world should be. So here you have a person, sorry, I think I messed that one up. Here you have a person who's engaged with a higher state to some degree. And here you have another person who's engaged with how the world should be. And by the way, we do this all the time. This is just natural and normal. So there's nothing negative about it. It's just survival mechanism. And that person gives off just a kind of empty space. And you have a response to that. Well, there are rules and regulations about how people should be. So you may have some, somebody else may have some, different ones. A whole bunch of people have different ones. They will perceive that person relative to them. Now that's a dilemma. Not really. They also perceive other people the same way, relative to them. We read frequencies, and the trust level and the willingness level to engage with that person in a friendly manner. Well, you could say that friendly isn't loving. Well, it's a rendering of loving, because that's what we do with the personality. That can be emotional as well as mental, as well as the way you engage with them physically. Positions, how you place your body, how you engage, how you look, how you think you need to do that to preserve your own images and also to engage with another, and you're not quite sure how you need to engage with them, whatever that may be. We're complicated. But the actual deeper level of loving shines through a bit. You may have a feeling of vulnerability, and in that state, an individual may be touching you in a place where you're growing inside is different than the zones of comfort that you have inside. And actually, that might be helpful to you, but you might be nervous with them, or you might feel a sudden liking for them or loving for them, or whatever you want to call it. Of course, in this particular case, it could be sexual, it could be emotional, emotion and sexual could be, or it could be mental, and not in a negative way. You might be considering, oh, that feeling is kind of nice. I like that feeling. Or you might have personalization feeling that relates to the true biases of the personality, where you have a zone where if anyone that you engage with puts you into a certain zone, then your bias tells you they're a good person, or they're the kind of person you want to be around more often. This is complicated because each one of us has a personality that has different zones. And we have different trust levels. And we have different ways of looking at the world. We also have an intellectual way of looking at the world. If your interactions with emotion are not trustworthy from your perspective, in that they've got you into uncomfortable circumstances, or where you couldn't make up your mind about life, whatever, then you switch over and move into a mental zone, and you try and see things from that particular pillar of existence relative to your biases. And I'm talking to everybody in this. And then you make up your mind about what whatever that sensation of caring for or not caring for means. And in fact, once again, these are facsimiles of loving. The biggest loving in all of these biases is the loving that you have for yourself. You have a bias related to loving and how things should be. That is a relative world, a virtual world. And this is the one that we have. And this is what we live in. This other deep level of loving comes upon you. It has nothing to, it's not a sexual thing. It's not a physical thing. It's not an emotional thing. It's not a mental thing. It's something that is vulnerable making because you're not used to it. If you were used to it, you would say, maybe to your friends, can you hang on a minute? I'm having a moment. This moment is filling me with just a sense of loving, a sense of being in and around me, a sense of not wanting to have any influence, anything else coming in my direction, because I'm not used to this, and I want to notice it and be in it for a few minutes. Your friends might have a few biases they may be inclined to use under those conditions, expressing to you a rendering of them. Not a rendering of you, a rendering of them. Are you weird? What's going on? I came 6 blocks to see you. Whoa. And or however it works for them. They would then be loving them and their version of what they believe they should be like, to find a kind of sense of comfort within them. But within you, You didn't go into this place. This place found you. This is a real deep sense of loving. Most other engagements with loving are part of the personality's method of being comforted within itself. And we need to be thankful that we have those things because they enable us to be functional in the world to some degree and to be functional around other people to some degree. And this is a very viable thing. It is a rendering of a kind of loving that is really not exactly the same rendering of that flow of loving that can come upon you. As a matter of fact, if I may, just let me look here for a second. If I'm not mistaken, Pat Donahue from New Jersey, I'll just bring her question up because it is relative to what we're talking about. I have a question about when we experience what I think might be an increase in energy or an awareness of a flow going through us that feels almost blissful in nature. When that happens, do we just be okay with it? Or is there something we can do as that flow is occurring? And that would be more helpful to ourselves and others. But I suggest for Pat, what I would suggest for the actual occurrence of the deep level loving in Anne's question is just to be in it as long as you can, trying quietly not to describe it, just to watch it, not to be excited about it. You might be, or see if you can calm everything down emotionally, physically, and mentally in your personality. If you can, stay with it as long as you can. That level of bliss, Pat, will turn into a sense of peace, a sense of pervasive loving all around you and in you. And that is something that occurs from the deep inside of you to allow you to know that it is real. I wish it could happen to 8 billion people roughly on the planet. I'm not so sure what they would do with it, except I have a guess. 10 chances to 1, they would try to find something in our intellectual orientations all around in the world, later, not during, to explain what happened to them. And this, if you look at it from an energy point of view, the best thing you can do is be as silent and quiet as you can and allow it to engage with you in a manner that would be helpful to you relative to you. In other words, there are different places in all of us that could be nurtured in different ways to enable us to go beyond, just beyond where we are now, so that we could open a little bit more, trust a little bit more internally, recognizing, of course, that 100% trust in this world might not be perfect. But the issue isn't, it's not about this world at the time, it's about that world inside of you at that time. And both of these questions are, what could I say? The answers are quite biased. If you never experienced anything like this, you will try to come up with a certain idea. In terms of frequency, it could happen with every frequency that exists. If your dominant frequency would be a scientific one, a socially, let's say, interested one. And what I mean by that is sociologically interested in how the whole of the world works, how each individual works, perhaps how the links between life and personalities engage, any of it, or a scientist or an artist, or you name it, doesn't matter. What dominant frequency you have in you will not be important at that time, because that loving flow is engaged with every single frequency. This is hard for some folks to understand. Most of the time, I think in conversations I've had with a few folk that are interested in this level, what I try to explain is that coarser levels of every frequency are involved with a terseness and engagement and validation that relates to the personalization of the self being vital, or a coarser level, you could say. As it moves towards a broader perspective, these frequencies will allow reconsideration, regurgitations, different ideas, because there's a middle ground where you try and understand something beyond where you are now, and you become more open to broadening the understanding of a pervasive engagement with existence. Sounds a little high, hoity-toity, but in fact, it's the most natural thing in the world. If you take a cycle of life, starting just after you come out of the womb or in the womb, it's up to you. Start wherever you want, wherever you can remember. And you begin to understand that you're moving through cycles of development, ever broadening, but also maintaining how, God, at age 3, you make up your mind about certain things. At age 10, you make up your mind about certain things. But you use the same stuff to do that with, but you make it broader than it was before. And as you go on in life, hopefully you broaden out your perspectives and consider, for a time at least, that whatever you know, let's say at age 100, whatever you know at age 60, whatever you know at age 40, whatever you know at age 20, whatever you know, there will be more that comes out of an understanding that you perhaps have. But you might even broaden your understanding to include more ideas. Or in your internal growth, you may be engaging with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 frequencies, different frequencies. In some areas, they call them rays. In some areas, they call them something else. Look at, everybody has theories about this. Some may say there are 7 colors. Look at a prism, and scientifically you see those colors, but you don't see the other frequencies that are there as well. And you can see them. We have tools now where you can see different frequencies other than the ones that are very easily visual to us based on the energy coming from the color, hitting our eyes, back in through into the optic nerve, and digested and defined as a certain frequency or a certain color. And therefore we come out and we say, oh, that's this, and that's this, and that's that. And it's a dilemma if you're colorblind, but if you're not, you already have something set up. But you have a hard time seeing gamma rays, X-rays. You have a number of frequencies that you cannot see. There are many of them. Now, that's only at this level, very physical level. Then you have other levels beyond that. People who become able to perceive colors around people or frequencies around people then have definitions of those colors they see, and they insist that a person is like this because their definitions are the right definitions of that frequency. My heavens. There may be a little bit of truth, but for example, red at one time was considered anger, and it still is by some folks. Red at another level is considered universal frequency. Tremendous, the will of the eternal and the profound universal profundity, power, love beyond belief, the will of love. It's an amazing mix of information and misinformation and validating something that you know has to be true because you're the one who believes it. This is a dilemma for all of us. Everyone runs into this. Keeping the self open, the psyche open, the personality open enough to consider something just beyond what you think might be real, and opening the door to that higher aspect or that higher level of mind. If emotion is on a continuum as well, the higher level of emotion will not be personalized. A higher level of physical engagement will not be personalized. These are quite interesting. There's no negation in this concept of continuum. If you will, if you took the highest concept of love that you could consider at a universal level, and then thought about us and how we like our different toys, and you could call that loving. What kind of car do you have? What color is it? Do you have a shovel? My shovel is better than your shovel. This kind of thing. My house, my this, my that. It's how we set our world apart. And loving is not an apart. It's an engagement beyond the need to describe. Very strangely, if you ever get caught up in that flow, you will not have the words to express it perfectly. Oh, you'll find some words. You use the words that you're used to using under certain circumstances, and then you'll say, but it's not really like that. It's more than that. But the describing is not the occurrence. The engagement with various frequencies is most interesting. If you want to read some stuff, Alice Bailey has a theosophical perspective on the rays. I always find that very interesting. Dr. Douglas Baker from England did a kind of synthesizing of some of her stuff. But as Dr. Baker said, and I would agree with him, her engagement is quite fascinating with it. And she was linked up, or let's say, had those intuitions or concepts come through her emotional mind or her mental mind, so she could write them down. They were in this box here, the one above the shoulders. And they were in there, therefore, she could write them down. And that's an interesting thing. It meant regardless of her personality's orientations, she had to some degree linked up with another state. Her personality may have impacted on that as anyone else's would, and the same with any other person you can ever come up with. It just doesn't matter who you come up with. The personality is there, and it's a tool. And love can operate through it in various degrees of frequency relative to the capacity of the individual to handle the frequency. And that's why we have all these incarnation concepts and karma concepts. In relating to that, Jen asked, I hope, by the way, if you have any more questions, and please don't be afraid to ask them. Jennifer from, where is she from?
New Jersey. Maryland.
Maryland, I believe, not New Jersey. Jen Butler, are we able to grow? What is the purpose of karma? Are we able to grow past the influence of a particular karmic pattern in one lifetime? Or is our course set no matter what we do? Is karma linked to the emotions? Once again, emotions in order function within us. I'm not sure what that means, but anyway. So here's what I would say about that. Both reincarnation and karma, both of them, are systems. They're quite universal. I happen to think that they're real. You may or may not. I would suggest, if you're really interested in trying to figure out whether they might be interesting or not, read all kinds of stuff. There's some very, very interesting books out there on karma, and often they're related to the negative side of things. I know that can be there, but I prefer a more positive orientation to these things. And since it was asked about karma, I'll try and relate to it rather than reincarnation. But reincarnation is an aspect of karmic engagement in a positive way. Here's why I think that. The idea of creating a form, a system, personality system that can handle over long periods of time, develop the handling of various frequencies that exist on these planes for the purpose of creating a system through which energy can operate for the purpose of helping others in their particular development. All right. If you need to have another incarnation, that karmic orientation will be asking these questions. Where can he engage again to help that being construct in the chakras as well as the personal orientations, because energy coming through the chakras, you use to create your biases, your personality settings, your positions and places in the world from a view related to perhaps past lives, but in a movement towards broadening out and engaging with a deeper understanding than the biases you walk into. In a lifetime. From there, you move towards an engagement with conscious perception of not only those chakras, but energy moving in from higher states through those valves or Zephyra into the world for the purpose of helping others to move along in their engagement with creating a system to handle more energy operating through. And I say more energy, I'm not talking about coarser energy only. I'm talking about energy that could be very, very subtly engaged with an individual to help them to grow in a particular lifetime beyond what they would naturally do so in that lifetime. Karmic orientation is a part of those two universal tools in the function, in the creation of a functional being that, in fact, doesn't take credit for something because she knows it's not her doing it. It's energy operating through her that is doing it. So the question is, are we able to grow past the influence of a particular karmic pattern in one lifetime? I think so. I think that's possible. But if you look at your life, you may see influences in your engagement with life that are very subtle, that would help you to understand what you're dealing with now. This is really difficult. You may see them, but you will have a bias about them. Very interesting. That karmic orientation is to help you to see what you're working with, or might possibly be what you're working with, because your bias is going to influence you and you may misread something. So if that's possible, then you're working with the idea that you're constantly going to misread things. And that is true of all of us. Because all of us are engaged with a thing that we have called personality. In spite of that, if you're looking to understand something without a whole lot of pressure, but an interesting will to be open to understanding something beyond what you believe things have to be, here is the real difficulty, then perhaps you can shift through something in a lifetime that would take you 4 or 5 lifetimes to even figure out. One of the things that I personally believe is really important is the commencement of an ability over time to perceive those chakras. As I've told you before, I talked to a yogi who was considered a prophet. Both Serge Pinot and myself did. And he said, he always asks us, would you like to know your future? I can tell you some things about your future. And he asked us if we had any questions. And Serge said, no, I don't have any. I said, no, I don't have any questions. But then I had one. I asked him, I said, can you perceive the chakras and the energy operating through them, and then tell where those energies are coming from, so that you understood that that was an actuality and not just some kind of theory? He said, oh, no, I can't do that. He said, that's only for saints. Only they can do that. Well, I happen to know that There are a number of people that I know who have begun to do exactly this. And you may think they're saintly, and I may think they're saintly, but they're not saintly. They're normal human beings. Now, what he means by saintly may be different than what we know as saintly. He may consider the fact that if you can perceive energies flowing from a higher state, that means that you are beyond the interest in knowing what's coming next, beyond the interest in perceiving different frequencies or energies that are really not really helping you to grow. But if you have the belief that they are helping you to grow and you consider yourself really able because you can do that, then you have to carry that until you start wondering about it. I think everyone on our coarser levels, one could say, who actually has experience related to different states of awareness, whatever they may be, will consider that kind of an ace in the hole. Really, you might be valued. And I've heard people say to me, because I definitely had a type of clairvoyance at one time in my development, and my continued development, by the way, doesn't stop wherever you are, that I could watch people engaged with their level of engagement and they no longer lived here. But then I was asked, do you want to be clairvoyant? Or do you want to be spiritual? It's a question. I never even thought of this question before. Isn't that still being spiritual? Never even thought of that. I said, no, I don't care what it is. First of all, I would rather be, whatever that means, spiritual. Because I'm not so sure that we really understand that. We have ideas related to it, and karma and reincarnation are two of those ideas, and they're universal. Even Christians, when they're talking about Christ, they realize that he really, New Testament stuff, not me, was Adam. And Adam, in the old Jewish manner, was Adam Kadmon. The Adam, the one who began an engagement through energy that was breathed into him by a very high state, or God in that image. And that flow of breath into that being was energy operated into him to make him a living being, a breathing living being. You all know that story. That relates to when Eve was created. A rib was taken from Adam so that Adam and Eve would be one, not two, not three, not four, not five, not different images, and taken from the thing that protected the breathing apparatus of this universal breath that was in Adam. Therefore, she became an aspect of Adam, involved with higher states in the Garden of Eden, of course. Another character that was in that state was the snake. He was in the Garden of Eden. How's that handle it? How does that make you think, oh yeah, but it's bad? No, snake was right there. So here's the deal. Since I'm on this, another question came up about this in Brahman. And the snake is an interesting character. If he was in the Garden of Eden, he could also communicate with God or that higher state. Put that one in your mind for a few minutes. Now you got two living beings with the breath of higher state in them, and they're breathing that, and they're engaged with that. And you have the tree of life, knowledge and life at a higher state. So all the steps in that tree of life, there in the Garden of Eden. And how do you get? Here's an interesting question. How do you get the breath of the Garden of Eden? A deep inner loving. How do you get it down into these coarser states? Here's a question for you. Now, you may think that's a bit weird. It probably is. But the snake whispers and says, if you eat this apple, because you're not supposed to eat it, otherwise, if you do eat it, you're going to become a part of the coarser levels. They had no digestive system functioning. Let's say it's neutralized. It's in a sleep mode. The snake is as close to an ego formation as you can get. A constructed system, but still in the Garden of Eden. They take the ego's, let's say, whisperings, and they begin their journey into a lower state. As you know, Adam and Eve lived to be very, very old, still involved with that lower state. The very act of all these Sephiroth, all these chakras operating fully in and around them, operate into these planes, literally, and the very act of an engagement, even their breathing, energy operating through them on all these levels, they could last for a long time. Others didn't. And it was passed on. This energy is passed on. Meaning, in some people's schooling, this is an involutionary process. They come into these states so that all of these cycles of engagement with lower states expose parts of how to functionally engage with higher states, the so-called, I think there's this evolutionary process. But it's not meant necessarily like an evolving system. It's meant a kind of pathway trodden into perception of higher states. Not only perception of these lower states from a different angle, but that's could be part of it. The act of love that was in the Garden of Eden, and beyond that, obviously, because other states were there, God would disappear for a while. Adam and Eve had no clue to where he took off to. Maybe he had to study someplace on another level. But different states of engagement. Parable. A story that shows us all kinds of engagement with the journey into higher states, from higher states. The expression of this kind of energy into others is like a catalyst. It links in, touches another, and the other is affected by a kind of stimulation that allows them to open differently than they would have through many timelines over a long period of time. So the time is cut shorter. But the personality form is a tool for engaging with the world. You have a sensory system, an emotional one. You figure out just exactly how things are only by a sensing coming into the nervous system, rushing to the brain. The brain says, my bias is, this is what's going on right here. And in many cases, it's pretty right on, but in the personality bias cases, not always right on at all. Just an avenue. You interpret others based on how you think they must be, based on how you are. Strange way of looking at life, but nonetheless, a deeply engaging, loving way of looking at life. You only interpret that way because your biases, how you believe you need to think things are for your comfort, is expressed by you. We are tremendously vulnerable on these planes. So we interpret vulnerability through vulnerability. And if we have an idea or an experience like was talked about in Pat's question and relating to Anne's question, if you have an experience of that loving orientation, then you know there is a deep level of loving within, but your focus is on natural things of these planes where we coexist. And we define them, and apparently how we define them is considered very valuable by some, not so valuable by others. And that is how our world is. They're not bad, they're not good, they're just, oh, no, they agree with my definition. Oh, they don't agree with my definition. I wonder if they ever thought of that. And they might say, how could he or she ever think that way? We tend to do these things that way because we think relative to the nature of humanity, where it already is at this point, relative to every single person on the plane physical, emotional, and mental. It's how things tend to work. I think, though, that particular question about is karma linked to our emotions? It's linked to our mind. It's linked to our emotions. It's linked to how we utilize our personality and its function. And it's linked inside. The biggest link of all is the opening and the movement of those internal chakras, internal Sephiroth or Sephiroth, or valves, whatever you prefer to call them. The calling of them is applied, the application of names to something so we can figure out what they might be. If we can remember that, then we don't have much of a problem with whatever you call them. It's very difficult to remember that, though, when you are self-protecting in terms of ideologies, in terms of our own way of seeing the world and how it's easier to see it from one perspective versus another. All of these things are aspects in our world of how we use love to allow ourselves to express ourselves relative to an us. This us versus some other us. In love, there's no such thing. But it's hard for us to handle that based on extremes that we meet in our world of living life. I hope I touched a little bit on some of these questions. Once again, my next one is one of Toshi's. Toshi, I apologize, I didn't get to your question. It looks like I'm hiding from your questions, but you're on a list, and Michelle as well. So next time we'll talk about some of the, there's a couple of questions from Toshi and a few from others as well. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for sending in questions. They usually dovetail to some degree, as you've noticed. And it's clearly valuable to have that happen. You asking questions of yourself is a very important thing in your journey. Try to keep them as inquiring as opposed to being negative, from a particular bias, because when you open yourself to broadening out your questions, suddenly you're hit with the idea of an answer that comes to you, then another one, and a different one, and they are always extending upon themselves so you can understand broader. These questions are very valuable to you. I wish you well. And now we're going to meditate for a while, usually somewhere between 45 and 50 minutes, and then we do a balancing and a grounding. You can do that. Hopefully that you understand how to do that. And remember, please turn your hands on. Hands are extremely important, and they will help the other chakras to open very much. Take care of yourselves. Be safe. Oops. And now we'll begin to do the balancing and grounding on your own. Take care, everybody.